Welcome to Voices of Resistance. You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul.
The viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff.
Our guest today is Frank Bessinger. I'm Barbara Humphrey, co-host of today's show.
And I'm Albert Strickland, co-host of today's show.
Frank, would you like to say hello to our listening audience?
Hi. Thanks, Albert and Barbara. It's nice to be here.
Great. Frank is a Vietnam War veteran and longtime activist and a member of Veterans for Peace. Voices of Resistance is a project of the Savannah Justice and Peace Collective. We give voice to those who have no voice in mainstream media and present a wide range of issues that affect us all. As you listen, please think about the voices of resistance you would like to hear on this show and email us at voicesofresistance@gmail.com or visit our Facebook page and leave a comment.
Before we start today's show, I think we should all be talking to each other about the things that are being done around the world in our name, things that we don't realize. And these things are closed in the name of freedom and democracy. And when we see the American flag, we think one way because we're trained to think in this way as it being the greatest thing in the world. But often I sit and wonder what someone in other countries think about it, especially those countries that are being bombed, or the houses are being destroyed, and children are made orphans. So it's something we should be talking about, I think, among ourselves. This is, after all, being done, as I said, in our name, and also, I don't think all of us with our consent.
As you listen to today's show, this is the U.S. designation of Flag Day, June 14th. I realize that it's not very obvious that June 14th is Flag Day. It's not a U.S. designated holiday, but it is the designation of June 14th is Flag Day. So we decided to dedicate this show to a discussion of U.S. nationalism as a religion and patriots as the adherents to that religion, with the flag being its primary symbol, the equivalent of a cross or Star of David, bringing its form of evangelicalism to the streets of America and around the world, leaving terror and destruction in its wake. We wondered as we were preparing for this show if there is a difference between national and patriotism, or are they both wrapped up in the religion of Americanism? So, Albert and Frank, what do you think about that?
Right. I tend to think of patriotism as something that's presented to the U.S. public as a desirable quality, something that everybody should feel, that patriotism is our duty, that we think of as individuals. We think of America as the best place in the world. Nationalism, I tend to see as a projection of that patriotism into the affairs of other countries. In other words, going out and proving that we're better than everybody else.
That's a great distinction. Albert, do you have any thoughts?
No, I agree. I think we are given this ideal of the duty of a patriot, but those ideals are not necessarily to follow empty-headedly to things. It's to think about what we're doing and to actually follow the ideals that we're presented with, like truth and freedom, a real freedom, not this kind of orchestrated stuff that we're fed here, but real freedom. That would be a duty of all of us, not only to share with others, but to have personally in our own lives. But nationalism does seem to be the love it or leave it. My country's always right, no matter what it does. And that's where I kind of leave things in the dust.
Well, we found two great quotes about patriotism from Emma Goldman. I'll read the first one. Patriotism assumes that our globe is divided into little spots, each one surrounded by an iron gate. Those who have had the fortune of being born to some particular spot consider themselves better, nobler, grander, more intelligent than the living being inhabiting any other spot. It is, therefore, the duty of everyone living on that chosen spot to fight, kill, and die in the attempt to impose his superiority on all others.
I get the impression when you were saying that that's something that can also be said about the rich against the poor. They are the privileged ones. They are the ones that are born into wealth and money. And they have that same idea of superiority or an arrogance about them because they have, and most of us have not.
Well, and they tend to have gates around their communities.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's true.
the gates.
Iron
The
gates, too, nonetheless,
Yes.
with guards. So the other quote from Emma is, patriotism is a superstition, artificially created and maintained through a network of lies and falsehoods, a superstition that robs man of his self-respect and dignity and increases his arrogance and conceit. And I think if we all look around, we can see that is exceptionally true today.
Yes, very true. So as we introduce this idea of a national religion, of statism as a national religion, which we came across the term Americanism, I want you all to think about this. For some people, it's a very new concept. Some people may have thought about it, or as we talk, will say, oh, yeah, that I understand that. So we read a very interesting article by a man called Frederick Edwards. He was writing for something called The Secular Web in 1987. And he talked about the United States, the US of A, formed from a very diverse group of people, diverse in linguistics, national, ethnic, and religious traditions, isolated on a coast of a continent they had only recently inhabited, that suddenly decided to set themselves apart from the rest of the world, and they needed a common bond, a unifying tradition. And there's some documentation of this in the words of the Founding Fathers. Benjamin Franklin pointed to the necessity of a public religion to promote good citizenship and ethical standards. Thomas Jefferson referred to Americans as enlightened by a benign religion, professed and practiced in various forms, inculcating honesty, truth, temperance, gratitude, and the love of man, acknowledging and adoring and overruling providence, which by all its dispensation proves it delights in the happiness of man here and the greater happiness thereafter.
Well, we can see where those things have led us at this point in time. But in 1922, Gilbert Chesterton also wrote that America is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed set forth with dogmatic and even theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. So where we are and where they thought, the idea basically that bothers me is that the idea is that you cannot have a moral ground or moral value unless it stems from some sort of religious ethics. And I think most of us would agree that that is not necessarily the case. In fact, is often not the case. So where do we go from here? We start talking and doing other things.
Yes, and as we think about Americanism, we can think about how Americans display and respond to its symbols. They have rituals. They take pilgrimages to view its shrines and relics, sing its songs, celebrate its holy days, which we call holidays, and is built on its unique history of myths, including martyrs, saints, and sinners. And certainly one of the most significant symbols of Americanism is the flag, which became more than just an adornment to military uniforms and a marking of U.S. territory in 1861, after the U.S. garrison was moved from Fort Sumter and fired upon by Confederate soldiers. Another important symbol is the uniform. With adoration or worship of the U.S. military uniform has changed significantly over the years and has become a symbol of heroism, bravery, patriotism, and valor.
So, Frank, the flag, how would you interpret this? I know it's a little difficult.
Yeah.
Well,
but, you know,
yeah,
I mean, we both
it's
follow
hard
the
for me
flag.
because I tend to reject the idea of nationalism entirely. But you know, in real life, in our contemporary society, I suppose there's nothing wrong with flying the flag in front of public buildings. I have a serious problem with what's expected of us in response to seeing the flag, and I know we're about to talk about that, but the expectation that people salute the flag every time it passes by on the street during a parade, before the ball game starts, in school before the school day starts. Now you're getting into some what I think of as very, very dangerous areas in terms of adoration of the symbols of a nation, which is, as Emma said, it's a false construct to begin with.
Which it is. And you can't go anywhere without a flag. They can't sell a car now with these big giant flags flying everywhere. You walk into, of course, schoolrooms. You and I grew up, apparently they still do it. You have those flags everywhere in the schoolroom. You have them in churches. You have them almost everywhere. It imprints on the mind this ideal of this nationalism. That's the only thing that's good. Everything else is an enemy to us in one way or another, and or at least opposite of us. Not as free as us.
Right. And as far as the uniforms, I see so much expression of this adoration of militarism in this country. It's really scary. Even if I'm wearing something that indicates my veteran status, even if it's a Veterans for Peace shirt, people want to thank me for my service. It's thank you for having served. And yeah, I for one am absolutely horrified when I see groups of people in military uniforms in public places in the U.S. I've seen it in other countries. In Mexico, you get used to seeing armed military people on the streets, in the airports and the bus stations and so on. But I've only recently have I begun to really see it on the streets of the U.S., and it scares the hell out of me.
Of course, we talked about it last week, being in New York City at Penn Station and seeing all these, not just uniforms around, but I mean decked out in the latest weaponry and equipment all over Penn Station, and even the local police the same way. And it is kind of scary. I remember some 10, 15 years ago, I had a friend who went to Greece and was surprised at the military presence with the automatic weapons in the airport there. I think we can almost rival that now. At the time, we couldn't. So yeah, that and the uniform, the adulation for this uniform thing, it bothers me in a lot of ways, because a lot of the things that we did with this uniform were not something we're particularly proud of, but yet we're deemed as some sort of hero, and it becomes a hero worship when we're not really heroes, I don't think. For me, a hero is an entirely different thing.
So we've now talked about Americanism, its symbols, and its response to those symbols. The next thing that all religions have is a prophetic vision or a dogma. We have Bibles, we have the Talmud, we have the Ten Commandments. We have so many...
The Quran.
The Quran, thank you. We have so many documents, and in America we have two documents in particular that profess a dogma, the Declaration of Independence being the first and the Constitution being the second. And ironically enough, like most documents, like most dogma of religions, they state ideals which many of us are well aware do not necessarily resemble reality, but yet we profess that we live by these ideals. We are zealots to these ideals, and somehow seem to be blinded to the reality that doesn't live up to the ideals.
Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal.
Well, yeah. All that the people that wrote that considered men were created equal. And even people who didn't own property were not even considered equal, let alone all of the slaves, all of the Native Americans, anybody who wasn't a white property owner, basically, was not considered equal. In some cases, not even considered human.
That's true. Or a part of only half, what was it, 3/5 human or something like that?
Yes.
Supreme Court ruling, Dred Scott. Yeah. So there are all those kind of things. We have the ideals expressed, but they're not reality. They've never been actually put into practice. And that's a major problem, fallback bars in these
Right.
things. What
In
else would there be? That's
Yeah.
one that I think of right off the bat. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is the ultimate thing we're supposed to be striving for. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as individuals in our own lives, but that doesn't happen that way either. We're prevented from achieving those things by laws.
Yes, and we're all well aware of how our liberties have been eroded and may never have existed to begin with. We all question, we know that we have a republic and not a direct democracy, yet we pledge to these, we fight for this dogma, these documents. In fact, in 3 weeks, we will be adoring the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, and I wonder how many of us will actually read it and recognize how far from reality it is. In fact, I wonder, for those of you who are listening, I wonder what percentage of our listeners would be part of that all men clause, would have gained the status of equality, and I would venture to guess that very few. But it's with zealotry that we accept these, that we honor them, that we follow them, and very much like other religions. And then we have our rituals such as pledging the allegiance to the flag. We display and dispose of the flag in certain ways. In fact, I was talking earlier about this ceremony that I was very familiar with from Syracuse, New York, where people gather at the New York State Fairgrounds on the night of Memorial Day, and they do this thing called a watchfire. And people are invited to bring their tattered flags, to bring their flags that are ready to be disposed of, and they're officially burned in the watchfire. That is the way that they are disposed of, and people come. It's a very patriotic thing to do. Some other rituals are wearing patriotic colors, standing to salute the flag when the national anthem is played, and there may be others.
Well, there are. There's even the
tell
way
me
a
some
flag
more.
is folded, or the way
Right.
it's put up in the morning or taken down at night. In the old days, I don't think we do that, as we were discussing earlier, much anymore. But we always had. I remember in high school, it was an honor to go out there and be part of taking down the flag and folding it correctly and presenting the colors.
And being sure that you don't let it touch the ground.
No,
Yes,
don't let it touch the
that's
ground.
right.
No, that was something that just wasn't done.
Wasn't allowed.
Yeah, so we do have all these things. The thing with the wearing the patriotic colors, I just love these bikinis and these bathing suits with all the red, white, and blue. There's stars and stripes all over them. So
And the paper plates, and
yes.
oh my God, yes, all the patriotic colors that will be coming out this time of year. Another thing that we're reminded of as we think about Americanism is the pilgrimages we make to our shrines. And some of these shrines being the White House, the Capitol, various monuments such as Lincoln and Jefferson and the various statues in Washington, D.C. and around the country. Mount Rushmore, Plymouth Rock, and Gettysburg came to mind. But again, there are many more shrines that people will pilgrimage to, particularly in the summer months when the kids are out of school.
There's all the old forts and things to visit.
That's right.
Which, everybody loves going to Fort Pulaski here, sort of thing. Or, and you're teaching your children the values of those things. Plymouth Rock was an interesting one. I've never been there, but we were recently at the Lincoln Memorial, of course, when VFP had our rally there at the monument to Lincoln.
Yes, and we walked them all a few times where there were many other statues, and we noted the fact that many of these statues, if not most of them, were either glorifying war or were statues of war heroes, even as we walk around Savannah, and also in New York City, when we saw at the southernmost boundary of Central Park with General Sherman on his horse.
I got to see that one. It's a gold statue to boot. It was really interesting to see this hero of the West, and of course the war between the states, sort of thing. So.
Or War of Northern Aggression, as I've heard it referred to.
So those things are put it. What have you experienced with these things? How many have you seen in your lifetime?
How many shrines have you pilgrimaged
Surprisingly,
to?
very few. I've never been to Washington, D.C.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, man.
How about the Liberty Bell?
But yes, they took us on a field trip to Philadelphia, and we went to the Liberty Bell and the Hall, Independence Hall.
Independence Hall,
Yeah.
sure. And certainly growing up in the North, it's not unusual to have visited the Statue of Liberty, or at least gone by it on the Staten Island Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
Which I did recently. I got to see it up close and personal on the boat going by. All these things. They are tenets of a religion in a way. The shrines you go to, no matter what your religion, you always have them. And the documents, the rituals, everything is all involved in a religion, and so are the relics.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
we thought about some of the relics that many of us will travel to. Original copies of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, historic flags, other historic documents as relics of Americanism. No doubt we could consider old rifles, old guns, cannons as relics of this very unique religion we have here.
General Custer's sword. I saw that at the Bighorn there.
Well, virtually all Americans have seen cannons somewhere. There's a couple of cannons right up
Yes.
here on Bay Street. I just remembered that one of the other places that school children in my part of the country used to be taken to was Grant's Tomb.
Oh,
On
Grant's
the Hudson
Tomb.
River in New York, yeah. Grant's Tomb.
Wow, I had forgotten all about that one. Yeah. And a more recent relic that I have had the pleasure of seeing, and it's become a symbol of Americanism to some extent, is a portion of the Berlin Wall. So when the wall came down, portions of the wall were placed in certain places, and there is one section at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri that I got to see. And it also reminded me of another relic, pieces of the World Trade Center that have come around to different places. Where I lived in Syracuse, there was a piece of the World Trade Center that was in one of the suburban areas not too far from where I was.
Oh, we left out the Alamo.
I was
The
just about to say that.
Alamo.
Yep, one of the famous shrines to American exceptionalism.
That's about it.
The Alamo. I was in San Antonio for training as a medic, and of course we went into town and visited the Alamo.
Yeah. When you think of songs, what's the first song that comes to mind for you when you think of these religious hymns that we sing?
Oh, my country, 'tis of thee.
Yes, that's the one that comes to my mind
Oddly
too.
enough, though, it's to the tune of "God Save the King."
Yep, absolutely.
Yes, very interesting, and certainly America the Beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, those amber waves of grain.
Battle Hymn of the
And-
Republic.
yes, the
Yeah.
Battle Hymn of the Republic. Absolutely.
The national anthem.
God bless America.
God bless
land
God
that I
bless
love.
America.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a native singer who just redid that, and it's a new rendition of "My Country 'Tis of Thee," and it's "My Country 'Tis of Thee, I sing, sweet land of
Sweet my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. Of thee I sing, land where my father died, land where my mother cried.
sweet land
and
of poverty."
Sweet land of poverty.
So,
That's
yeah.
right.
So there are some new songs coming out with a little different slant.
Yes. We're trying to get a local musician to record that for us so we can play it on the show, because it's really, it really puts this whole conversation in perspective, I believe. Yeah, so we have our hymns, we have our relics, we have our pilgrimages, our rituals, our symbols, and the traditions of our symbols. And then we have our holy days. We very conveniently have changed that Y to an I and combined the words, so now we have holidays, but they are nonetheless the holy days of Americanism. We mentioned the one coming up shortly, July 4th, but there are a few others.
Memorial Day.
Just had Memorial Day.
Yeah.
And Veterans Day, of course.
Of course,
President's Day.
and Thanksgiving, which we will talk about a little bit later when we get to the myths.
Yeah. President's Day is interesting to me because, well, actually all these are, because basically what they become is just ways that we can buy and sell all the more. President's Day, you're going to save 50% on President's Day at the mall here at this store, or on
And it's
whatever.
not just a day, it's a 3-day
the
weekend.
That's right.
That's right.
Other than July 4th, these holidays, well, and Thanksgiving, they've been made 3-day weekends. And then Thanksgiving, the tradition now is many people have the benefit of having the Friday off, so they have 4-day weekends. So the only holy day that has kept itself pure at this point is July 4th.
Yeah,
and,
the primary ones.
You know, this year it's on a Tuesday, and no doubt many people will get Monday off so they can have this wonderful 4-day weekend so they can burn fossil fuels and go visit some shrines, go take some pilgrimages.
And blow things up.
And blow things up. Thank you. And blow things up. Yes, yes.
But we also have the respect to our saints and martyrs. No religion is complete without saints, martyrs, and even a few sinners thrown in once in a while. So we have our own. We have our presidents, especially those first few presidents, Washington and Lincoln, and Jefferson and Adams and Monroe, not so much. But when you think, what do you think about? You think of Jefferson, you think of Washington. And then, of course, there are the other presidents that are prime, like FDR or Lincoln or
Teddy Roosevelt.
JF
Teddy. Well,
right,
Teddy.
Teddy.
Teddy's a whole story to himself, though.
Yes, he is. JFK, who is a saint, but also in some ways is considered a martyr.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for the most part, even the presidents who some of them may question their ability to rule, such as Ronald Reagan, have in some cases become almost saints. So we're going to stop here for a moment. You're listening to Voices of Resistance with co-hosts Barbara Humphrey and Albert Strickland and our guest Frank Bessemer, and we're going to identify our station. You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul. We're also going to listen to a message from our sponsor, Brighter Day, and a message on how you can become a sponsor. At this time, we also want to encourage our friends, our listeners, to consider supporting WRUU, because this is a very valuable asset in Savannah.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Brighter Day Natural Foods, offering produce, vitamins, and supplements, and a deli and juice bar. Brighter Day is located at 1102 Bull Street at the south end of Forsyth Park. More information available at 912-236-4703 or brighterdayfoods.com.
If your business enjoys our programming on WRUULP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving community based on diverse, vibrant radio programming. As a business partner, our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUULP.
So thank you to our listeners for staying with us. This is Voices of Resistance. And we're going to go back to our discussion of Americanism, the state religion of America. We've been talking about our saints. We mentioned a number of our presidents who have achieved sainthood, whether they deserved it or not. And there are also others, not the presidents, some of the heroes of, certainly the early patriots leading up to July 4th and the Declaration, the writers of the documents, the heroes of the various wars along the way. And we also have our martyrs. So we brainstormed a list of those who we could consider martyrs, who died for the cause.
Well, we brainstormed, apparently not too long. We came up with Davy Crockett at the Alamo, of course, and George Custer, surprisingly, because when I was a kid, he was a big thing. Oh, George Custer was a hero, George Armstrong Custer. And it wasn't until the truth comes out that some of these heroes kind of slip in the polls, you might say. We realize the true nature of who they were and what they actually did instead of the propaganda, the hype that we're fed. So it was interesting that Custer made our list of martyrs, though.
Yeah.
Name one, Frank. Can you name another
Can
martyr?
you name another
tried.
martyr?
You can't think of a lot of them.
Died in the service of Americanism.
Well, of course, all of them that were at the Alamo, which we've got, kind of
Jim Bowie
lumped in.
Jim Bowie.
Yeah, with Davy Crockett and
Sam Houston, was he at the Alamo?
Sam Houston, exactly.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I've forgotten about that one, too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then we had our heroes who may or may not have risen to sainthood, but certainly who fought, many died in service to this country. We talk about Buffalo Bill, Kit Carson, and clearly, Andrew Jackson with the War of 1812, that War of Northern Aggression that we talk about, U.S. Grant, William T. Sherman, Generals Meade and Sheridan, and the Spanish-American War and Teddy Roosevelt charging up San Juan Hill. And
Yeah, there's quite a few.
there's quite a few. There's too many, unfortunately, many too many, and most of them are war heroes. As we brainstormed, we didn't come up with any World War I war heroes, but maybe that's just because we just didn't find any. But
We waited on Frank for that
Yes,
one.
we waited
because I
on
know
Frank.
Frank has a whole list. Yeah.
Well, as I recall, General Pershing
Pershing
was, he's considered a hero of some sort.
yes,
But yeah, I mean, you think about this whole list, and the more recent ones, from the Second World War, Ike, Patton, and MacArthur and those guys, they're held in high esteem in this country.
I know.
And all they were was soldiers. Some of them were better soldiers than others, but, when you think about who should be considered a hero, do you really want to include mostly people who went to war? And I find it a little bit disturbing that these people are considered the saints, martyrs of this Americanism that we're talking about.
But isn't that what nationalism is built upon, though?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the real heroes in a society. It's these people who are put on pedestals that really shouldn't be there. That should not be the ideal. The ones who are real heroes in my book, and I've heard this expressed many times in many ways from different people, is that those who work to prevent war, those who work for peace, those are heroes. The people who actively promote, participate in wars, not so much in my book.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, as you were talking, I actually came up with the names of 4 individuals who didn't achieve near sainthood because of their valor in war, but were also in some places considered heroes. The first one on my list was William Seward, who was responsible for the Alaskan Purchase, and there actually is a Seward Day in Alaska, which is a holy day, a holiday. And then we have DeWitt Clinton, which many people may not be familiar with, and he was responsible for building the Erie Canal, which made it possible for Manifest Destiny. That was how the settlers got, that was the route that they took to go west. And then, of course, Lewis and Clark, who were also very responsible for us being able to go from sea to shining sea.
Well, also in our heroes we left out 2 that are very important in our lives. Vietnam, of course, Westmoreland, and a few of the others, and General Petraeus for Afghanistan and whatever else, and who've kind of fallen from grace, but still they were the heroes. So,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
She did mention this thing called Manifest Destiny.
Well, yeah.
Whoa.
Whoa.
So what is it, Frank?
Yeah. Every time I've tried to think about this concept of manifest destiny, I wonder how it was ever possible that this idea could be implanted into the American psyche early on, almost from the very beginning of European colonization of North America, that the land rightfully belonged to the colonists, and that it was our manifest destiny.
It was our right.
To tame the wilderness, to take it over and civilize it. All of these ideas just seem so strange to me now, and yet virtually everybody bought into it and believed that was absolutely what they were supposed to be doing. They were going to go west and make their fortune and settle and civilize the wilderness.
Yep.
And those who lived in that wilderness.
Yeah.
Yes, and those who lived in that wilderness. In fact, one of our hymns, one of our songs mentions from sea to shining sea. It was our right. It was our destiny, and nothing was going to get in our way. And clearly nothing did. Well, what got in our way we managed to dispose of, to take care of, which, So, anything else on that?
Well, just I see manifest destiny as the defining doctrine of American nationalism or exceptionalism. Just the presumption that we had the right to drive people off their land, kill them for their land, and just bring our own people in there and take it over. It's horrifying when you think about it.
And we didn't just manifest destiny here, but then we created something called the Monroe Doctrine, so that we could do virtually the same thing and take over all of South America. That belonged to us as well, and especially our corporations that went in and our military that went in. And so, yeah, manifest destiny was always an interesting theory to me. That it reminds me of very Christian thinking. We are the new Israel, the new Jerusalem, and this land was given to us. This land is my land.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
Yeah, it's all ours. So, as we know, any religion worth its salt has the myths that are used to promote that religion. And I'm sure those of us who come from a religious tradition can think about the myths that we listen to, we were taught to believe in. Well, it's also true with Americanism. And I have to say, it's hard to say we had a lot of fun with this,
No.
but it was painful to look at the various myths that are used to promote Americanism. And maybe the fun part came in being able to dispel the myths. And the first we just talked about was the discovery, the concept that this land was here for our taking, for our settling, from sea to shining sea. And it was based on a concept of the doctrine of Christian discovery. And clearly, we all learned that Christopher Columbus discovered America as if it was here with nobody here. It was lost, and we discovered it, of course. And with absolutely no mention of the fact that it was fully inhabited. Millions of people lived on this continents of North and South America, and particularly in what became U.S. of A. And so certainly that myth is an easy one to dispel. It wasn't lost to be discovered. It was here for us, for the settler, for the colonization, for the settler taking.
Which parallels to me something we talked about several weeks ago, too, is Israel with the Palestinians. It was a land without a people, because they weren't considered people, I guess. And the same thing here for us.
Mm-hmm.
This was ours for the taking, and it was given to us by the powers that be, although we had to use the muskets and all to take it. But
Well,
so, yeah.
Yeah, that's a typical taking. We already talked about manifest destiny, another myth that the land was given to us as the land was given by God to Israel from sea to shining sea. It was ours to colonize, to take, as if it wasn't already inhabited by people. Certainly another myth that we are able to dispel is that the U.S. was founded on the doctrine of religious freedom. So here are all these people rushing overseas to the American shores to get away from the oppression of the countries they came from, forced religions. Yet the reality is that many of the colonies were tolerant to only one religion, such as Maryland, which was a Catholic colony, Pennsylvania, which was inhabited by the Quakers, the Lutherans, and the Mennonites, Massachusetts, a Puritan version of Protestantism, and Virginia, the Church of England.
And don't forget Georgia. You were not permitted in this colony if you were Catholic. It was against the law.
Wow. Okay, so this concept of...
Not
yes.
everyone actually, I know that's the thing that's put out. They came here seeking religious freedoms and all that. Actually, they came seeking fortunes, using whatever tools they had, and that was one of them.
Well, unless they were indentured servants.
There you go. That's true.
Right. And, yeah, so another myth debunked. Then the myth that the land settled by the American colonists were that were uninhabited, that they were here for our taking, and not inhabited by numerous indigenous nations, including the Creek and the Cherokee in Georgia, Hatteras, Cherokee, and Catawba, and others in North Carolina, the Haudenosaunee and the Algonquin in New York, the Yamasee, Catawba, and Cherokee in South Carolina. And
And
each,
the Yamasee here. I mean, yeah. So
yeah, so each
Yamacraw,
colony...
Sorry, Yamacraw.
Yamacross. Each colony had its indigenous nations that were already here, that already lived here, and the myth that this was uninhabited land that was ours for the taking is certainly needing to be dispelled. Another myth was that on the first Thanksgiving, which I'm going to let Albert talk about because he just loves this myth so much.
I do. I love this myth of Thanksgiving. You know how all these nice people get together and they just have this big wonderful meal together and play games and all of this. And of course, we know now that none of that's true. It's all a myth, a blatant lie, and it was created to this manifest destiny and make us seem so perfect and so wonderful. But it's an interesting story.
And it's one of the most enduring stories. Even now, even today, you go into elementary schools and kids are making pictures of pilgrims and Indians sitting down and eating dinner together, and the heroic Indians saved the pilgrims from starvation, and they were friends.
Savages, the noble
exactly.
savages.
Yeah.
Do you remember in school making the headbands and stick the, what is it called, the crepe paper or whatever it is, that you cut the feathers out and put all those multicolored things, and then you'd sit around and have these little skits about how wonderful everything was.
And the big wide belts with the buckles.
Oh, yes, and the shoes.
And the buckles on the hat.
Yes. Of course, none of that's true either, but that's what we've given the impression of. And so, it was pretty much, I mean, that, when you think about what really happened, what was it, 700 natives were massacred, or indigenous peoples were massacred in one area. This is before the Thanksgiving Day, where they came so lovingly and happily. And we'd stolen already so much of their land, and so there's just no truth in this. And it's time that we really face the things we've done, and where we are now. But it was it is a fun thing to cut out all those little feathers and glue them into bands.
Yeah, and to just imagine these noble savages, first of all, helping us get the food, getting some of the food for us, and then sitting down for fun and games after they had been decimated by diseases that the colonizers brought over and massacres, their crops destroyed, their land stolen, and here they are, smiling, happy, and it's all fun and games.
And I use the term codified because this was not codified as such until Abraham Lincoln, basically. I mean, it's celebrated everywhere from time to time, but as far as the codification actually came from Lincoln in 1863. And it seems as Barbara and I both kind of came up with this thing, the statement that America's most religious when it's most patriotic, and so this man who made America so great at the same time ordered the largest mass hanging in American history when he hanged Dakota 38. Native Americans or indigenous peoples who had to flee the reservations to keep from starving to death were collected and hanged. So, and at his order. So.
Yes, at his order. Another myth is that the indigenous ways of governing had no impact on the U.S. founding documents. That is a total myth. We're taught that the founding fathers came together and their brilliance created the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, when in fact much of the governing systems from in those documents were the result of the way the Iroquois Confederacy governed. That the Iroquois Confederacy actually laid the foundation for the founding principles that appear in these documents.
Well, we also have, I remember a lot of little tales about George Washington never having told a lie and chopping down the cherry tree and admitted to it. And then I also heard one that I can't get anyone else to corroborate, but I was told that he actually skipped a coin across the Potomac River. You've heard that
across the river.
So
Yes,
see?
across the river.
I did hear it. Okay. Just wanted to make sure, because everybody says, I never heard that one.
When in fact, one of the things that the great George Washington did, which we actually celebrate, when you think about is nothing to celebrate, on Christmas Eve, crossing the Delaware to attack the English. Imagine that, on Christmas Eve. I mean, it's a horrendous thing. So, these myths. And of course, what we learned as we were debunking these myths is that the cherry tree story, invented by an early Washington biographer, and then the tale was transformed into a children's story in 1836. And of course, as we know, has endured. Many of you probably read this story in school. So another myth, of course, is that with our founding documents, as we talked about earlier, that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights. It's a myth, given the reality of slavery.
Not only did that not include black slaves, indigenous people, but no mention of women.
No.
All men are created equal.
Right.
Women, not so much.
Not so much. And really, it was white property-owning men
Yeah.
who were the equals.
Exactly.
But women do get mentioned. I mean, Betsy Ross actually stitched this flag together, which is a myth. I mean,
Which
really,
is another myth.
There is no corroborating evidence that ever happened. And the one that got me the most, though, is that there is no documentation anywhere that Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." None. And actually, this biographer that is 40 years after his death, working in from oral history now. You know how difficult that is 10 minutes from now. But 40 years, he made that this is what he said. Now, authentic, I doubt it very seriously. But it's great propaganda. Give me liberty or give me death.
And then, of course, we have the great Civil War myths, the great myths leading up to the Civil War and the Civil War itself. So we came across a PBS show, History Detective Special Investigations. And from that, we read, which many of us, of course, have already come to the conclusion, but it's important to dispel the myth, that the Civil War was fought over the moral issue of slavery. Rather, the economics of slavery and the political control of the system really drove the Civil War.
Actually, I found that, in New York, that the Wall Street was founded on slavery, and they actually sold slaves on Wall Street in New York. Now, that's something I was not taught in school at all. And they profited all this time off the cotton and off everything, off the backs of these slaves. And so that was a little disconcerting, because I had one of my bishops came from Germany, and he said in Germany they were taught that this war was not fought over slavery, it was fought over the economy. And we know basically all wars are basically economic for the most reason, whether it's land or whatever, it's still the economy that's involved.
Well, and of course, and the Southern economy was based on slavery.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's where the slavery issue came in, and it was not a moral imperative, it was an economic imperative.
Right. And of course, the myth of slavery as a moral imperative that had to be abolished was something that gave the North the high ground to, to be able to recruit, particularly as after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued that said, slaves could flee to the North and,
Join the
by
Union
the way,
Army.
join the Union Army.
And then they would be free.
Yes.
No one, I think, in their right mind ever can see slavery of any kind as moral, period. I don't care what it is. Even our debt that we have now is a kind of slavery that, to me, is immoral in a way. So the idea that this war was fought over this issue is even dispelled by Lincoln himself, who actually said it was not fought over slavery. It was fought over, the only goal he had was to keep the Union together. That was it. And if the South, after we seceded, had come in and said, hey, we want to go back again, that was it. We just walk back into Congress and take our seats. It was all over. And slavery issue would not have been corrected in any way at that point in time.
Right. One of the things we learned that Lincoln's election in 1860, it was won without a single Southern electoral vote. And this pretty much assured the South that they had lost all influence, and they turned really to the only alternative they believed was left to them, secession, a political decision that led directly to war. Although the other thing we learned is that secession was not unconstitutional. Secession did not become illegal until after the Civil War in Texas versus White, where the Supreme Court determined that secession was unconstitutional. This happened in 1968. So secession was something that the states by right were able to do.
1868.
1868.
Yeah, okay,
Excuse
so-
me,
yeah.
1868.
Well, there's a lot of other myths that we aren't going to have time to cover right now. The
Right.
myth of the domino theory that Frank and I are definitely familiar with.
Yeah.
Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Honest Abe.
Yeah, and they're
Oh.
going to, they're going to. If we don't get them there, they're going to get us here. And the myth that we've talked about, the American exceptionalism, which is nowhere near true, and that they hate us for our freedom. That was one that really got me, really good. Actually said they hate us for our freedom. Of course, the bombs were dropping on them had nothing to do with their hatred of us at all.
No,
It was just
nothing
we were
at
free.
all. And the fact that we impose sanctions on countries and starve them economically. Many of us remember, was it Madeleine Albright talking about, it's okay to starve a few thousand children because we're right. So none of that caused hatred in the countries that hate us. It certainly wasn't our freedom. So, yeah, there is so much else we could be talking about, that Americanism as a religion. Albert, Frank, you want to add some more comments before we end our discussion?
Well, there are more contemporary examples of what this nation will do to people who try to dispel the myths. This is a very dangerous place for people who dissent from the mythology.
In the land of the free.
And the home of the brave.
Yeah, they're very brave if they're speaking out for the rights of people who have had their rights infringed upon. The response of official America to the creation of the Black Panther Party was just horrific. It was incredible. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, people, Leonard Peltier, people who have exposed people who have exposed the myths of America and acted on those beliefs have been dealt with brutally. We saw what's happened recently to Julian Assange, Edward Snowden,
Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning.
Yep.
And in the old days, Jane Fonda was vilified, totally.
Oh, my God. Hanoi Jane.
Yes.
Yes, and the other myths, certainly the silencing of the causes of certain events, despite the fact that evidence has come up to dispute the official versions of many events, such as the sinking of the Maine, Pearl Harbor, the justification for dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the assassination of JFK, and the attack on the Liberty by Israel, which is an event that I had totally forgotten, and in our research, it bubbled right up.
That was a very important event. I mean, an American ship is under attack. Don't matter who it is. The response is what the Navy did. They sent help. Washington told them to recall that help and not to go help it. So 2 hours later, there are many sailors that are dead, and we know who the perpetrator was because they told us. It was Israel. So why would we recall help for an American ship under attack by anyone, no matter who it is? But we did.
Yeah. So certainly another myth there. So unfortunately, we are going to have to stop our discussion now because we were going to talk a little bit about bringing Americanism around the world and all the places where the flag has led the way. We came across the term gunboat diplomacy to talk about how we spread freedom and democracy around the world and Americanism. And we will have to save that for a later show. But now we would like to give you a few bits of information. First of all, since all three of us are members of Veterans for Peace, we would like to let you all know about an event coming up this Sunday. Veterans for Peace will be showing a movie called Daddy, What Did You Do in the War?
What did you do in the war, Daddy?
What did you do in the war, Daddy? Sorry. At the Sentient Bean. And it's a series of movies that we try to use to bring out the realities of war and then have conversations afterwards. And with our
Well,
remaining minutes, yes.
As we said at the beginning, the most important thing is that we start thinking, we start talking to each other, and we start doing things that reflect the values of what we think we should be as people, and as a people especially who wants to bring peace and security to the world, not more death and bloodshed and bombings and destruction.
And next week we will be talking about racism with our special guest, Monifa Johnson, who we're very excited to have joining us here in the studio. So you are listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul. See you next Wednesday.
You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.